Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, you've brought in some really fascinating material focusing on, well, a pretty harrowing period, the Dust Bowl in the 1930s, hitting the American and Canadian prairies.
That's right. And the sources really paint a picture of this intersection, this collision between a major natural disaster, severe drought coming in waves, 34, 36, then again 39, 40.
Right, lasting years in some places.
Exactly, up to 8 years for some areas. And this drought hits land where, well, human factors had already set the stage. Poor dryland farming practices, settlers essentially destroying the topsoil.
So nature and human action combined.
Precisely. It took an existing agricultural recession and just amplified it massively into this huge ecological and agricultural catastrophe.
And the cultural echo is so strong, isn't it? You think of Steinbeck's The Grapes of Wrath.
Absolutely. Or Woody Guthrie's music, those Dust Bowl ballads.
And those photos. Dorothy Lange's Migrant Mother. Haunting. They really capture the human side.
They absolutely do. They bring it home. So our goal today, our mission for this deep dive, is to unpack all that. Look at the causes, the impacts, the responses, and pull out the key lessons, maybe even some surprising details from this material.
Okay, sounds good. Where do we start? Geography, history.
Yeah, let's set the scene first. Geographically, the sources pinpoint the epicenter as west of the 100th meridian out on the high plains.
So we're talking Texas, Oklahoma panhandles, parts of New Mexico, Colorado, Kansas.
Exactly. That's the core area. And it's not uniform terrain, some rolling hills, some flat plains like the Llano Estacado, but that 100th meridian is key. It's roughly where things get significantly drier as you head west.
Right. And the climate there is naturally semi-arid. Less than 20 inches of rain a year, typically.
That's it. Historically, it's supported short grass prairie. It's a region naturally prone to long droughts, then wet periods, and always, well, pretty high winds.
So farming was always going to be a challenge there, even before things went wrong.
Definitely. In fact, the early perception, as the material notes, was the Great American Desert.
Why was that? Lack of water, trees.
Yeah, lack of obvious surface water and timber made it seem less appealing compared to the East, which kind of explains why the government later had to actively push settlement.
Ah, right, through things like the Homestead Act of 1862, giving away land.
Exactly, 160 acres to start. Then later acts like the Kincaid Act boosted that to 640 acres in Nebraska, and the enlarged Homestead Act gave 320 acres elsewhere. It shows a real federal push to get people farming out there.
And people came. After the Civil War.
They did. Big waves of migrants, immigrants too, especially once the Transcontinental Railroad was finished in '69. And all those people meant
more plowing, more land being farmed.
Precisely. Yeah. More cultivation.
Now, the material mentioned something interesting. A wet period. That kind of misled people.
Yeah, that's a crucial piece. There was this unusually long spell of wetter than average weather during those early settlement years.
So people thought farming was easier than it actually was long term.
Right. It fueled this idea, this belief, rain follows the plow.
You mean they thought farming itself would make it rain more?
That was the theory. Widely promoted, but yeah, totally unfounded scientifically. It's a powerful example of how a belief, even a wrong one, can drive actions with huge consequences. Makes you wonder, doesn't it?
It really does. What are we assuming today? Okay, so before farming really took over, what was the main thing? Ranching.
Initially, yes, cattle ranching dominated, but then the sources point to some harsh winters starting around 1886, a big drought in 1890, plus overgrazing. It all pushed landowners towards cultivation instead.
And then more settlers arrived, early 20th century.
Yes, another wave of European settlers came, and wouldn't you know it, another wet spell coincided with their arrival.
Just reinforcing the idea that farming was the way to go.
Exactly. And then technology comes into play.
Mechanization. Tractors, combines.
Right. Small gasoline tractors, combine harvesters. Suddenly, one person could farm much, much larger areas with less labor.
Which means even more land gets plowed up. Faster. Even the really dry parts.
That's the key. It accelerated everything. Even land getting less than 10 inches of rain a year, incredibly arid land, was being turned into cropland.
So you have this naturally dry region, pushed for settlement, hit by misleading wet periods, and then turbocharged by new technology. Sounds like a recipe for disaster.
It really set the stage perfectly, which brings us to that perfect storm of causes the sources talk about. The absolute core issue was the type of plowing.
Deep plowing.
Extensive deep plowing. It just obliterated the native grasses. And those grasses, with their deep, tangled roots, were what held the soil together and kept moisture in even when it was dry.
So we basically removed the land's natural anchor.
We did, and mechanization just scaled up that destruction massively. Tractors made it easy to convert huge areas, maximizing short-term yields without thinking about the long-term risk to the soil itself.
Until the drought hit in the 30s.
And when it hit, bam! That topsoil with nothing holding it just turned to dust, fine particles.
And the winds picked it up, those black blizzards.
Or black rollers, yeah. The descriptions are terrifying. Walls of dust blotting out the sun carried for hundreds, even thousands of miles.
All the way to the East Coast, New York, D.C.
Yep, dust falling on ships in the Atlantic, red snow in New England, and on the plains themselves. Visibility down to just a few feet sometimes.
That's unimaginable. Where did the name Dust Bowl actually come from?
It came from a reporter, Robert Geiger, with the AP. He was covering a particularly bad storm, Black Sunday, April 14th, 1935, in Oklahoma.
Black Sunday.
Yeah. His editor, Edward Stanley, read Geiger's report and coined the phrase Dust Bowl.
Initially, that meant the actual place, the region.
Right. The geographic area hardest hit about 100 million acres, centered on the Texas and Oklahoma panhandles. But now, we mostly use Dust Bowl to mean the whole event. The dirty 30s.
And the economic cost, the sources mention figures.
Staggering. By 1936, they estimated losses at $25 million a day.
Which is, what, over $500 million in today's money?
Yeah.
Every single day.
Roughly, yeah. Around $570 million in 2024 dollars. Daily. The scale of the economic hit was just immense.
And that kind of economic devastation, it must have forced people out, right?
Absolutely. Tens of thousands of families, they couldn't grow crops, couldn't pay mortgages. Farms were abandoned. People were left destitute.
This is where we get the image of the Okies migrating west.
Primarily, yes. Though it wasn't just Oklahoma Arkies from Arkansas, Texies from Texas too, all heading west, mostly towards California, looking for work, for survival.
But California was also deep in the Great Depression, wasn't it?
It was. That's the tragic irony. They arrived over 86,000 in just over a year, more than the gold rush, often finding similar poverty, facing discrimination. It wasn't the promised land for many.
Such hardship. Was all the migration long distance, though? Or did people move shorter distances, too?
Good point. The material highlights a lot of internal migration, too. People moving within the Great Plains states from the worst-hit counties to areas that were maybe doing slightly better.
So the whole population was shifting around.
To a huge extent. In some areas, migrants actually came to nearly equal the number of long-term residents. It shows the scale of the disruption.
Now, you mentioned a myth earlier, that it was only farmers migrating.
Right, and the sources bust that myth. A Bureau of Agricultural Economics survey in '39 found only about 43% of southwestern migrants in California had actually been farmers back home.
Really? What were the others doing?
Almost a third were professionals, white-collar workers. It cuts across the social spectrum. It wasn't just an agricultural workforce that was displaced.
That changes the picture quite a bit. How did migrants generally fare long-term compared to those who stayed?
It's complex, but the sources suggest that despite the awful journey and initial struggles, many migrants might have actually ended up slightly better off by the end of the Dust Bowl than those who stayed in the hardest hit zones.
How so? Finding different kinds of work?
Sometimes, yeah. Farmers sometimes moved into semi-skilled or even skilled jobs eventually. Non-farmers might have taken a step down occupationally at first, but didn't necessarily fall into poverty at higher rates than those back home. There was some occupational mobility, even if forced.
And that migration wave left a permanent mark, especially on California.
Absolutely. About an eighth of California's population today apparently has Okie heritage. It shaped the state significantly.
One more point on population. Was it mostly people leaving or people just not arriving?
That's interesting, too. Outmigration did go up a bit compared to the 1920s, but the main reason the population dropped in the Plains states was that fewer people were moving in. The usual flow of newcomers just dried up.
Makes sense. Who would move into that? Okay, so massive human cost, displacement. But this also triggered a huge government response, didn't it?
Oh, massively. The sources really emphasize this. It led to a much, much bigger role for the federal government in looking after land, conserving soil. It was a turning point.
Like the Soil Conservation Service. That came out of this.
Directly. What's now the NRCS. Plus things like the Prairie States Forestry Project planting millions of trees for shelter belts.
Shelter belts.
Like windbreak.
Exactly. To slow the wind, hold the soil, and the Resettlement Administration, later the FSA, helping people move from the worst areas.
And this was all part of Roosevelt's New Deal.
A lot of it was, yes. The Soil Erosion Service was set up pretty quickly, August 33, under Eakes and Hugh Hammond Bennett. They saw the urgency.
And later acts. Like the Soil Conservation Act of '36.
Right. That one continued farmer subsidies, but interestingly required landowners to share those payments with their tenants or laborers. A step towards thinking about income equality, not just crop prices.
Speaking of prices, wasn't there that controversial program, the AAA Killing Pigs?
Ah, yes, the Agricultural Adjustment Act efforts. Controversial, definitely. Over 6 million pigs were slaughtered to try and stabilize prices. But the sources note the meat was distributed to the needy through the Federal Surplus Relief Corporation. So it was complex.
And help for farmers losing livestock. Yes, the Drought Relief Service set up a program to buy cattle in the emergency areas. It provided some immediate cash relief when farmers had nothing else.
And the CCC, the Civilian Conservation Corps, they were involved too.
Big time. They did a lot of the actual planting for the Great Plains Shelter Belt. Over 200 million trees, the sources say. A monumental effort.
So immediate relief, but also long-term strategies, teaching better farming.
Exactly. A huge educational push on soil conservation.
Mm.
Crop rotation, strip farming, contour plowing, building terraces.
Things we take for granted now, maybe.
Many of them, yes. And they offered financial incentives, like $1 an acre, to get farmers to adopt these methods.
Did it work? Did it reduce the dust?
Apparently, yes. By 1938, they saw a reported 65% reduction in blowing soil. So the conservation efforts, combined with rain finally starting to return more normally in late '39, made a real difference.
And this built a lasting relationship between farmers and the government.
It seems so. That cooperation, that reliance on federal programs, really solidified during the period and lasted for decades. The President's Drought Committee even published a detailed report in '35, just laying out all the ways the government was helping.
But the damage was already done in many ways, wasn't it? That topsoil loss?
Oh, yeah. Irreversible in many places. Over 75% of topsoil gone in large areas by 1940. That's your foundation for agriculture. Just gone.
And that must have had long-term economic effects on land values.
Absolutely. The sources show a clear link. The higher the erosion, the bigger the drop in agricultural land values. We're talking maybe 28% decline in high erosion counties versus 17% in medium erosion ones compared to low erosion areas.
And did those values ever fully bounce back?
Often not completely, it seems. The land was permanently degraded in many cases.
Why was recovery slow in some areas? Was it just the damaged land?
Partly that, but the sources suggest other factors, too. Maybe a slow shift towards agriculture that was more suitable for the damaged land, like raising animals or growing hay.
Why slow? Lack of knowledge? Money?
Could be several things. Lack of know-how for these different kinds of farming, maybe limited credit, remember, lots of banks failed during the Depression. Or maybe those alternatives just didn't seem profitable enough initially.
It leads to different ways of looking back at it, doesn't it? The sources mention contrasting views.
Right. You have someone like Donald Worster who takes a pretty critical view. He argues the move towards big, capital-intensive agribusiness afterwards was maybe just masking the underlying problems, not really solving them sustainably.
And the alternative view.
Matthew Bonifield focuses more on the human element, the resilience, the endurance. He frames it more as a triumph of the human spirit over adversity, so different interpretations of the same events.
And more recently, any economic studies?
Yes. The material mentions a 2023 study in the Journal of Economic History. It found, interestingly, that while the impact on the agricultural land itself was large and lasting, the impact on average wage incomes was more modest. So the economic fallout was maybe more complex than just looking at farm output. People adapted, perhaps moved into other sectors over time.
Fascinating. Okay. Lastly, the cultural impact. We touched on it, but it was huge.
Immense. And so much of it was documented, often thanks to government programs like the Farm Security Administration employing artists.
Photographers like Dorothea Lange.
Her migrant mother photo is iconic. But the sources add that poignant detail about Florence Owens Thompson, the woman in the picture, and her complicated feelings about becoming this famous symbol without ever really benefiting from it.
Yeah, that adds another layer. And music. Woody Guthrie.
His Dust Bowl ballads basically became the soundtrack for that experience. And those migrants carried their music with them, especially country music, to California.
Influencing things like the Bakersfield sound.
Exactly. That distinct country music style has roots in the music the Dust Bowl migrants brought west.
Even more recent stuff references it. TV shows. Movies.
Yeah, the HBO show Carnivale was set during the Dust Bowl. And the movie Interstellar, believe it or not, used Dust Bowl parallels and even clips from a documentary about it to depict a future environmental crisis.
Wow. And musicians today are still engaging with it.
Seems so. Grant Malloy Smith's album Dust Bowl American Stories got a lot of acclaim, showing the story still resonates.
So wrapping this up, what are the big takeaways? It feels like this confluence of factors, natural drought, yes, but heavily amplified by how humans treated the land.
Definitely. That interaction is key, and the result was just immense human cost displacement, poverty, incredible hardship.
But it also led to a massive government response, changing its role in conservation and providing vital aid, right?
Absolutely. A fundamental shift in government involvement and a lasting legacy in programs and land management practices. And culturally, its impact is undeniable and still felt today.
It really makes you think, doesn't it? We have so much more technology now, better farming, irrigation, weather forecasting. Are we really immune to something like this happening again, maybe in a different form?
That's the provocative question, isn't it? What vulnerabilities might be hiding in our current systems? Are we potentially making similar mistakes, just masked by technology? It's definitely something to ponder, drawing on the hard lessons learned from the Dust Bowl.
A sobering thought to end on. Thanks for bringing all this material together. It's been a really insightful deep dive.